Good morning, everyone. We are Group 6 and we are here to present Zeus Salazar's paper entitled Pantayong Pananaw.
When the Malacanang wrote an encyclopedia about the Philippines, Salazar noticed that it was catered to non-Filipinos. He came to this conclusion because the encyclopedia used pang-kami terms, and it was written in English. So clearly, the target audience were English speakers. He claimed that the authors of the encyclopedia were Filipino nationals, but not Filipinos by heart, who only copied from Filipinos or were working with foreigners. That encyclopedia is an example of pangkaming pananaw. To write Pantayong Pananaw is to write about the Filipinos' experiences, values, history, skills, dreams, personalities, deeds, using one language.
Within us Filipinos, we have the closed circuit system. It is when the participants of the conversation all understand each other because they're using a shared language, therefore making the conversation flow and train of thought continuous. For example, the Tagalog people who had their own language, behaviors, and beliefs. Before the colonization, the deity worshipped was Bathala, but when the Spaniards joined the picture, Christianity was introduced. When integrating another culture or society, they must first understand it deeply before conveying it to their community, describing it as they are like this, they do things that way. When explaining our culture to foreigners, we use an inclusive Pantayong Pananaw, but when discussing foreigners to foreigners, we switch to a Pangkayong Pananaw.
Because of colonialism, we got segregated into different ethno groups, which caused us to lose our nation's unity. They forced their culture on us while the elite accepted it with open arms. That is the reason why we don't have a concrete Pantayong Pananaw.
In the 1800s, Filipinos gradually integrated into Spanish society here in the Philippines and began learning the Spanish language. This shift made the Spanish colonizers feel threatened about their position, leading them to belittle Filipinos.
A little later, in the 1900s, the Ilustrados emerged. Educated outside the seminary, they were politically and economically aware and engaged in debates with the Spanish, who often looked down on both the indigenous Filipinos and the Ilustrados for being of the same race. The Spanish colonizers claimed that Filipinos owed them for civilizing the nation and introducing Christianity. However, 98% of Filipinos didn't care much about these claims since they didn't understand Spanish. Furthermore, the Moro or Bangsamoro communities were largely indifferent to this as well. They had their own way of life, were separate from the rest, and upheld a strong sense of unity through their Pantayong Pananaw.
Rizal noted that when the Spanish arrived, we lost interest in our own culture, instead, working for them and admiring their ways. He criticized how the Spanish distracted us from focusing on ourselves. With the pangkaming pananaw or an inclusive us for us perspective and the Western education some Filipinos had acquired, they began to resist the Spanish in their own way, serving to the Spaniards a bit of taste of their own medicine.
When the Americans arrived, we tried to prove ourselves worthy, but we were left behind. Starting last while others were already ahead created our need for outsider validation. Much of what we do is foreigner-friendly because we've internalized these standards. We wanted so badly to be included that we wrote in their language, erased parts of ourselves, and then took fragments back to appear original. They taught us English for their own convenience to build their civilization here. During their rule, pang sila and pang kami perspectives dominated, deepening the division in our identity.
The Americans' primary goal in educating Filipinos was to mold them into good followers, undermining any rise in nationalism right after Spain's defeat. Under the Jones Act, the government and public services were led by Filipino, yet American educators remained in charge, ensuring that all key decisions still required approval from the American Senate. This setup reinforced dependency and limited true Filipino autonomy as Americans kept control over education and other essential areas to sustain their influence in the Philippines.
We were conditioned to believe that we are only an agricultural country, praised for producing raw materials other nations used to make products we then buy back. We are also taught to perceive Asian countries as agricultural countries. So we underestimated Japan because we saw them as another Asian country. But look who's astounded when their made in Japan technology led them to victory in World War II.
In the end, we may be fluent in English, but our own language is struggling because we neglected it. This superficial understanding of English also led to shallow leadership from the United States. Without deep communication, we couldn't discuss ideas meaningfully.
For example, when politicians address the public in a language that lacks depth for them, they only skim the surface of issues, leading to misunderstandings and mistakes. People's limited comprehension of English leads them to be overly impressed, assuming that anyone who speaks it well must be intelligent, educated, wealthy, and powerful.
This language barrier has hindered democracy. The masses feel they can't fully understand politics, so they leave it to the candidates and end up with narrow perspectives.
Due to the dominance of English, many students give up on education because they can't connect with it. As a result, those left are often unable to fully understand English or even their own native dialect, which has been neglected in school.
It is the job of nationalists to stand against private schools run by non-Filipino interests. Beyond education, American media still dominates. Filipino education should be for Filipinos, focused on our nation, its needs, and its goals. School shouldn't just be about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It should teach us to love and serve our country as its citizens with a focus on national survival.
Citizens argue that they're too poor to worry about the country and can only think of themselves. And I get that. But how can we move forward without stepping back and looking at the bigger picture?
We weren't taught to see others objectively. We were taught to follow without question, creating distorted views of ourselves and others. Education's job is to change this mindset, to make us think of ourselves, our country, and our future. If not, nothing will ever change and will remain followers forever.
The diverse ethno-linguistic communities across the Philippines contribute to the Kalinangang Bayan, or people's culture. But the Tagalogs had a unique role. Since colonization was heavily centered in Tagalog regions, they've struggled more to embrace change directly, yet this has also given them an opportunity in uniting the nation.
Due to poverty, many children aren't privileged to receive formal education. While this is a disadvantage in some respects, these children remain grounded in their communities, absorbing its values, virtues, and rich history rather than being influenced by foreign imports and global pressures. One reason why the elite's efforts to revive colonial practices are failing is their insistence on reviving Spanish, a language that no longer resonates with most Filipinos. They're also outnumbered by those connected to their own culture and communities. On top of that, there's a lack of originality. Clinging to colonial influences shows a loss of personal identity. Such an empty version of national culture is uninspiring, lacking in love, authenticity, and character.
National culture, once genuinely for Filipinos, should realign with Kalinangang Bayan to evolve into Kabihas ng Pambansa, a national civilization. This collaboration could serve as a window to the outside world while Kalinangang Bayan grounds us in our roots and identity.
Uniting different sectors of Filipino society and making each feel authentically Filipino is an essential first step in national development. This way, we can stand on our own, truly understand ourselves, and dismantle the immense cultural barriers that have long held us back.
In conclusion, the Pantayong Pananaw is one whole, not broken pieces of cultural or characteristical discussion. Through the power of friendship, we can get together and fight against the gentrification of the Philippines by the colonizers and the elite.
Thank you for listening to our presentation on Zeus Salazar's paper on Pantayong Pananaw.